Mayor mobilized National Guard to crush Harlem. Bumpy Johnson stopped them with one phone call. The city buzzed with threats, armored trucks rolling closer, sirens sharp as knives. Harlem braced. Men whispered about the National Guard mobilized to crush the neighborhood. One man remained unmoved, calm, watching. Bumpy Johnson. The word reached him before it reached anyone else. Harlem streets hummed with unease, whispers curling through alleyways and brownstone stoops. Trucks, armored in black, were moving north. Sirens cut through the afternoon haze, sharp and precise, carrying the mayor's intentions across the city like a blade. The National Guard, mobilized to crush a neighborhood that had never asked for permission, was on its way. Inside a dimly lit office, smoke from a lone cigarette curled lazily, twisting upward in slow, deliberate arcs. Bumpy Johnson sat behind a polished wooden desk, hands resting lightly on its surface. He didn't move when the news arrived. He didn't frown. He didn't even blink faster than usual. In that stillness lay a quiet authority that no uniform could contest. Outside, Harlem held its breath. Children stopped in mid-step. Merchants paused with cash in hand, and the faint strains of jazz from a nearby club seemed to soften under the weight of expectation. Men of the neighborhood, gangsters and street hustlers alike, watched for reaction. They expected agitation, perhaps a command, maybe even confrontation. They underestimated the calm. Bumpy's gaze swept across the room, noting every detail. The distance between the city and its soldiers, the narrow alleys the guards could never traverse unnoticed, the faces of men who would follow him anywhere. No orders were given. None were needed. Presence, he knew, was authority when executed correctly. Outside, the sound of engines grew louder, an ominous rhythm. The tension was palpable, hanging like smoke from a still-burning fire. Everyone sensed the inevitability. The city's plan met a counterforce unspoken, undeniable. Bumpy didn't rise from his chair. He didn't speak. He simply allowed the threat to approach, measured it, contained it, and prepared. In silence, he became the wall that even an army could not cross. Harlem had yet to understand the full weight of the moment, but Bumpy did. The streets were quiet, almost unnaturally so. Harlem, usually alive with chatter and jazz spilling from clubs, seemed to hold its collective breath. Windows stayed shut, shop doors remained half-closed, and the hum of distant traffic felt muted. Everyone knew the same thing. Something unprecedented had arrived. The National Guard was coming, and Bumpy Johnson was the only thing standing in their way. Inside a corner office of a familiar building, Bumpy leaned back, letting the news settle over him. He didn't shout, he didn't gesture, he didn't even raise his hand. Just his presence, calm and measured, filled the space. Men who had seen him settle disputes with nothing more than a glance now looked at him with the same quiet certainty. Authority wasn't loud. It was recognized by those who understood its language. He picked up the telephone, a simple rotary model, its cord coiled and taut. His fingers hovered above the receiver for a beat, just long enough to let anticipation stretch thin. Outside, boots echoed on sidewalks. Trucks rumbled along avenues, their engines alow, constant warning. But inside, Bumpy's calm was absolute. The contrast was palpable, controlled power against the display of brute force. The community's eyes were on him. Shopkeepers, musicians, children on stoops, men leaning on lampposts. They all watched, some from windows, some from a safe distance on the streets. That they didn't need instructions. That it didn't need orders. Harlem understood the code. Loyalty wasn't blind. It was earned through demonstration. And Bumpy had proven that, time and again. He finally lifted the receiver and spoke, his words measured, deliberate. It wasn't volume that commanded attention. It was inevitability. Each syllable carried weight, each pause a reminder of restraint. Outside, engines slowed, hesitation creeping into the ranks of uniformed men who thought they could march unopposed. Trucks halted at intersections. Soldiers glanced at each other. Someone, somewhere, had realized the wrong man was in charge of this neighborhood. Bumpy hung up without a flourish, without raising his voice. The effect was immediate. Harlem exhaled quietly, collectively, feeling the tension dissolve like smoke. The National Guard, a threat meant to intimidate and crush, had been met not with guns, but with principle. Respect had been demanded by no one and granted by all. In that stillness, the lesson was clear. Power lived in the calm, not in the noise. No one moved first. No one questioned the authority in the room. Harlem waited, but it no longer feared. Bumpy had drawn the line, and every eye, every soul in the streets, knew precisely where it lay. The National Guard commander had assumed control would be met with panic. He believed muscle, numbers, and regulation could bend Harlem overnight. He had seen uprisings, protests, minor disturbances, and assumed the same script would play here. But he hadn't accounted for Bumpy Johnson. From the club's rear office, Bumpy observed the unfolding movements. Trucks lined avenues, boots clicked on pavements, helmets glinted under the gray light. The display of force was loud, visible, meant to intimidate. And yet, inside, the calm was palpable. Bumpy didn't need to raise his voice. His authority, earned over decades, radiated through the room and spilled into the streets like a quiet tidal wave. He walked slowly along the wooden floor, the weight of his steps measured, deliberate. Every man who had been in his presence before recognized the signs, a calm that carried consequence. He didn't gesture toward the window. He didn't shout commands to the civilians peeking from behind curtains. His gaze alone moved through the streets, slicing through the bravado of men who thought violence could right respect. Outside, the soldiers paused. Orders echoed, but hesitation had set in. Bumpy's reputation preceded him. A man who never needed to fight to claim authority. A man whose decisions could alter outcomes without the flash of weapons. The commander's assumptions faltered as he saw the subtle but unmistakable shift. Men lowering their rifles slightly, trucks idling where they had rolled forward, tension wrestling with training. Inside the club, the patrons waited. Their silence was deliberate, a testament to trust in a man who had always protected them. Musicians stopped mid-chord, hands hovering above keys. Shopkeepers froze in doorways. The community had learned the language. Power existed not in noise, but in control, not in threat, but in the quiet certainty of consequence. Bumpy Johnson's restraint was the most visible weapon of all. Bumpy's fingers brushed a pocket, nothing more. The razor was there, sharp, ready, but unnecessary. Its mere presence spoke. The principle was clearer than any bullet could convey. Overreach would be met with precision, not spectacle. The mob, the city, even the National Guard now understood that Harlem streets were not unclaimed territory. Respect was demanded neither by threat nor gunfire. It was earned, demonstrated, and defended by those who understood its weight. For a long moment, the city seemed to pause. Engines hummed low. Soldiers shifted uneasily. Somewhere, a drummer beat a quiet rhythm in a distant club. And in that rhythm, the lesson was embedded. Bumpy Johnson commanded more than men. He commanded inevitability. He exhaled slowly, a soft sigh that went unnoticed by few. Outside, the command moved like a shadow through ranks. Hesitation, awareness, acknowledgement. The National Guard would not advance today, not because of confrontation, but because one man had already claimed control with his presence alone. Harlem watched, and it remembered. The threat underestimated the quiet, and the quiet had already won. The crowd had gathered at the club entrance, curious and tense, a living wall of faces that had seen Bumpy Johnson enforce law and order in Harlem long before city officials could understand the meaning of control. Rumors of the National Guard's mobilization had spread quickly. Threats whispered, warnings passed from mouth to ear. But Bumpy, as always, moved like the eye of a storm. Quiet, centered, inevitable. Inside, the offender waited. A man from outside Harlem, a stranger with slicked-back hair and cheap confidence, had believed arrogance could displace authority. He smirked at the patrons, leaning too close to the doorway, letting his presence fill the room. Laughter followed him, forced and high, slicing through the low hum of conversation. He assumed that volume equaled dominance, that mockery was armor. But the room had already aligned itself, and the alignment had one focus: Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy entered from the back, a deliberate rhythm in his steps. He wore his coat with the ease of ownership, the fedora tilted just enough to shadow a measured gaze. No one else stirred. The music softened, acknowledging him before any word was spoken. He didn't need to speak. No voice, no command, no gesture could add to what his presence had already claimed. The room belonged to him. The offender tried again, louder this time, shouting a joke, a taunt meant to provoke. He leaned closer to Ellington, who played on despite the tension, fingers brushing keys lightly, holding the cord like a lifeline. The room reacted not with fear, but with recognition. Patrons straightened. Chairs scraped softly, then stopped. Cigarettes burned longer than usual, smoke curling in the stillness. All eyes found Bumpy, who measured the man with calm scrutiny. No sudden movement, no threat displayed. The razor remained unseen, but the promise of it was understood, embedded in the quiet. Each patron absorbed the lesson. Disrespect had consequences, but those consequences were not always immediate. They were inevitable. Bumpy's restraint was a hammer that fell without swing, a measure of authority more precise than any gunshot. The offender faltered, sensing the room's shift. He had believed spectacle would sway these men and women, that loudness would rewrite respect. But every subtle breath, every controlled step from Bumpy eroded his confidence. The man's smirk cracked into a thin line, then disappeared entirely. A bead of sweat traced the curve of his temple. He realized, finally, that respect in Harlem wasn't given, borrowed, or purchased. It was commanded by presence, principle, and unwavering calm. Outside, the crowd had begun to lean closer, whispers passing like currents, watching a silent drama unfold. They had learned from Bumpy that restraint could be more powerful than violence. They understood that loyalty to one man, one principle, one measured authority could alter the flow of a city's heartbeat. Each observer felt the weight, and each remembered. Ellington's fingers pressed one final chord, letting it linger. Silence filled the room, thick and deliberate. The offender's bravado collapsed inward, and in that collapse, Harlem recognized its protector once again. Bumpy didn't need to speak. He didn't need to move. He simply existed, and the balance was restored. The lesson was complete. Not with blood, not with fire, but with inevitability. Respect had been reaffirmed, authority had been unshaken, and every eye in the room, from the youngest hustler to the oldest patron, knew exactly who wielded power in Harlem. Even the city outside felt the echo. The phone rested in Bumpy Johnson's hand like a weapon, though no one in the room needed to see the threat. Outside, the National Guard waited, ordered, mobilized, their presence meant to intimidate, to enforce compliance. Harlem had been tense for hours, rumors spiraling through the streets. But inside, Bumpy moved as if the world outside did not exist. Calm, deliberate, absolute. He lifted the receiver. No hesitation, no trembling in the hand that had settled disputes with whispers, glances, and promises sharper than any blade. His voice, low and measured, carried authority without pleading. On the other end, officers and commanders shifted. Words were exchanged, but only a few were needed. One call, one statement. Harlem remained untouched, its streets and souls intact. The guard withdrew. The room exhaled collectively, but Bumpy remained still, his gaze scanning the space. Eyes had followed him through every chapter of the evening, from insult to reckoning, from subtle tension to recognition of authority. Now, all elements converged. The offender, who had believed loudness and boldness could command a city, stood frozen. His wealth, his connections, his brashness, all meaningless against the precision of Bumpy's restraint. No fists were thrown. No gun was raised. Power radiated from stillness. Bumpy's posture, the slight tilt of his head, the quiet certainty in his gaze, spoke more than words ever could. The razor never left its sheath, but its promise had been understood. Control had been asserted without spectacle, without headline-grabbing violence. A city's pulse had been measured, and it beat under his guidance. The patrons, musicians, and passers-by absorbed the weight of what had occurred. In silence, they recognized principle enforced. The rules of Harlem were reaffirmed. Respect was earned, authority was quiet, and Bumpy Johnson was the living embodiment of both. Each person in the room understood their place, not out of fear, but out of acknowledgement. Ellington played softly once more, a chord lingering in the smoky air. Bumpy replaced the receiver, letting his presence continue to dominate the space. Outside, the city would whisper for days about what had happened. Not about chaos, not about battle, not about force, but about inevitability. The man who sought to humiliate had been reminded that some power cannot be challenged. Some authority does not require noise. Some legacy is written in restraint. And Bumpy Johnson had written it clearly, with one call, one pause, one measure of control. The club slowly returned to rhythm, but nothing was the same. Chairs scraped softly against the floor, glasses clinked quietly, and conversations resumed with measured cadence. Harlem exhaled, but the exhale carried awareness. Every resident, every patron had witnessed the demonstration of restraint, of authority that needed no display of violence to command obedience. Bumpy Johnson had reminded them why his name was spoken in hushed reverence. He moved through the room deliberately, each step steady, each glance intentional. People turned, not to stare but to acknowledge. No one approached. No one interrupted. The balance had been restored by a single hand, a single phone call, a single presence. Outside, the streets buzzed with rumors. The National Guard had been mobilized and then withdrawn, not by gunfire, not by riot, but by a quiet insistence that Harlem answered to its own. Bumpy paused near the piano. Ellington's notes floated around him, soft and deliberate. Music and power coexisted here, intertwined, and the room recognized the symphony of authority and respect. The mobster who had tried to provoke disruption had retreated into awareness. He understood now that some forces could not be bullied, bribed, or threatened. Power was not in volume, nor violence. It was in control, in principle, in patience. Outside the windows, the city had seen a lesson delivered without spectacle. Harlem remembered. It whispered to its children, to its neighbors, to the newcomers. Bumpy Johnson was not a man who needed to fight to win. He had shown that authority could exist quietly, that respect was earned and never demanded. Streets, alleys, and clubs carried the echo of his presence long after the doors closed. And in the calm that followed, the legacy was clear. Not as a brute, not as a tyrant, not as a man who thrived on chaos, but as a master of restraint. A man who understood that the truest demonstration of power was in measured response, in patience, in letting the world recognize his place without forcing it. Harlem had witnessed it. The city would never forget it. And Bumpy Johnson's name would endure, not shouted, not written in headlines, but etched in the memory of a community, alive and loyal, for generations to come.